right approach to studying the Bible. In other words, we have attempted to bring it under what is called critical level. And I think because of popular misunderstanding, that we should consider the meaning of the word critical or criticism as it is used in this type of work. In the first place, it carries no implication of depreciation of any kind. Criticism does not mean the kind of criticism we offer our friends. It means analysis for the purpose of discovering the topic, the facts of the matter. Now, facts themselves, particularly in cases of this kind, involve both obvious and elusive elements. And we learn gradually through criticism that facts out of context may no longer be facts, because facts relate to time, place, circumstance. It is a fact, for example, that a man riding stage can say honestly that no one has as yet made a flight to the moon. This statement is not only factual, but it dates the fact. And if this article was read 500 years from now, and then in the meantime visited the moon, we would know approximately the period at which the earlier writing was done. Thus, we have from facts certain implications and overtones which enable us to discover valuable correlations, the search for the historical outline of any subject under consideration. The next thing that criticism deals with is the problem of idiom. An idiom is tremendously vital in the study of language. We know, for example, that modern Greek is not the classical Greek. We know also that there is a difference between high school Latin and ecclesiastical Latin. We know that the English of Chaucer is not the English of today. Idiom changes. An idiom is much more than mere spelling, pronunciation, or the structure of sentences. Idiom has to do with the actual, factual meaning of words. Now, for example, 50 years ago, when anyone referred to a hood, they meant a covering for the head. Today, they mean a covering for a motor. It is a different meaning. Therefore, if we are not able to determine the relationship in time sequence, and do not know the idiom of the time, we are at a serious disadvantage. This is especially true on the philosophical and religious levels, because those levels, more than any others, have been subjected to idiomatic change. Religion being an exceedingly subtle subject, one requiring a tremendous grasp of the inner meanings of words in order to use them at all successfully. We find idiom very important in all religious or philosophical literature, which attempts a high level of scholarship or a high level of factual accuracy. Thus, idiom has to be examined, and failure to consider it almost always mutilates meaning. Now, an interesting example of idiom, perhaps, lies in the choice and use of words and the meanings of them, which gives us another important field. Very few persons know the meanings of words. was not his name, and is not a name. Stephen or Stephanos is a title given, or was given in the idiom of that time, to a man who had won the games, who had been awarded a wreath to wear upon his brow as a sign of victory. This was a Stephani. And we have a reason to believe that the martyr's crown was derived from this term, and that Stephani is a term of title and not a person's name. We've had the same trouble in the Old Testament with Melchizedek, because Melchizedek, actually in the idiom of that time, was Melchizedek, which meant a priest of Zadok, and was not a man's name. These problems of idiom can go on for a long time. Now, many will say it means nothing anyway. If this is cutting hairs, you fine. Actually, it means a great deal more than we think. Because this lightning flash of idiom may strike anywhere, may strike an odd and unusual term which we might never find important. But it might also strike a very relevant and vital term about which we could want to know with some exactly the meaning of that term. So criticism embraces these problems. It embraces also the problems of the relationship of works containing historical information to the historical framework appropriate to those works. Most scriptural writings do contain a degree of history. They do refer to places and persons and things. Therefore, the critical historian, the critical biblical scholar, is concerned with the relationship of these internal quotations or statements to the profane history of that time, and the bearing of these internal records upon the problem of authorship. Because authorship is often revealed or denied by mistakes on the historical record. These mistakes must indicate lack of familiarity with the facts. Now, in the connection of the problem of the evening, in connection with the New Testament, there are certain things that we know and a great many things we do not know. Those things that we do know, in order to be advanced to that term which we call knowledge, or to a factual level, must have been discovered as a result of procedure in which adequate proof was not only available but was used. A thing is not known because someone believes it to be true. A thing is not known because someone has affirmed it to be true. A thing to pass into the critical level of knowledge in biblical scholarship must be a matter upon which there is no reasonable doubt left. In other words, the testimonies of the interrelated witnesses have so strengthened a case by their mutual support that it is almost impossible to deny the fact without denying the validity of dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of reputable witnesses. It is therefore not a fact or a known thing until it has been subjected to very careful analysis and historical and bibliological research. So when we say some things are known, I will try to explain as we go along what I mean by the fact that they are known, rather than that they are thought, believed, hoped for. And while we do accept without question that there is a tremendous lacuna in this entire subject, a great deal that is not known, still 600 million human beings read the Christian Bible. Among such a group, there are bound to be many who want to know what is knowable about the book to which they have given their allegiance. I'm not speaking now of its content from the standpoint of inspirational or revelational basis, but about the book itself, about the work that was done in the preparation of it, its history, its present to us, and the positions and vicissitudes through which it has passed. Many persons interested in the book are also concerned with these facts, because they later realize that these facts have a strong bearing upon their faith, upon what they believe, and why they believe it. So with that background, we will take up one or two of the points that we can cover in the length of time that we have. These New Testament writings are divided into three essential groups. The first of these are known or called the apocryphal writings. The second, the canonical writings. And the third, the so-called uncanonical writings. Now, these three groups have existed together for a very long time. The canonical writings are those which are now contained within the New Testament. The canon was established at the Council of Nicaea in the year A.D. 325. The so-called apocryphal writings are those which existed at the time but were for one reason or another rejected by the Council of Nicaea. The so-called uncertain or uncanonical writings include a collection of works of similar spirit, similar type, similar essential content, which have been added to the religious literature of the world between the 4th and the 12th centuries of the Christian era. These so-called uncanonical writings include a great many of the religious works of remote peoples who gradually came under Christian influences, or were the products of schismatic groups within the early church, or in turn, in groups that became variously associated directly or indirectly with the descent of the church, as the Gnostics, the Manichaeans, and other so-called borderline groups. The uncanonical writings include such works as the Pistis of the Gnosis, the Proevangelium of the Pseudo-Matthew, and similar types of material. These works, nearly all of them concerned with parts of the New Testament story. Many of them contain material presumably spoken by Jesus on various occasions, but not accepted in the canon. Now, in addition to these three general groups, there is a fourth, which we will mention only in passing, but it deserves a lot more thought by sincere individuals. That fourth group is called the Logia. Now, the Logia consists of books, religious writings, which have no definition or boundary, and are known to exist only through quotations from them found in some other works. Now, in the Logia of the New Testament, if we take under consideration the Ante-Nicene Fathers, or those leaders of the religious descent of Christianity, who flourished between the 1st century A.D. and the Council of Nicaea, 325, we find approximately 30 or 40 books, presumably Gospels, quoted and named by them, and not one of them known to exist. Therefore, the only evidence that we have of these books is in these quotations, which are found in the writings of others. In some instances, these writings can be fitted together to give us considerable outline of a lost or missing book. In other cases, we are not so fortunate and can only perhaps rescue a sentence. Thus, we have a considerable body of literature involved in our problem. One point that is factually established is that the Ante-Nicene Fathers, writing from the time of Paul to the Council of Nicaea in 325 A.D. do not mention by name any of the Gospels of the New Testament. Now this is very important. They wrote extensively. They were a learned group. They quoted from 20 or 30 books that are not known to exist, but they did not quote from the ones that did survive. And it's a perfectly simple matter to prove that, because the complete library of the Ante-Nicene Fathers is available. Now this means one of two or three things, and causes the critical scholars of the subject to come to the conclusion that that class of work, which we call apocrypha, are older than the canon. In other words, books that were rejected were the ones that were quoted by these early fathers. We know also that at the Council of Nicaea, the rejected books were destroyed, which is probably one of the reasons why we do not have them available today. This statement is generally true, but there is an exception to it. Namely, that undoubtedly the Nicene Council was unable to control all existing manuscripts. Therefore, an Old Testament apocrypha and a New Testament apocrypha did survive. Even in the first edition of the King James Version of the Bible, the Old Testament apocrypha is included, although it has since been dropped. One of the famous books of this apocrypha, you will all remember, is the Maccabees. The New Testament apocrypha was dropped at an earlier date, but some old Bibles do contain part of the apocryphal material. But we should remember that 3, 4, 5, or 6 apocryphal books have survived, but at least 40 are known to have existed. Therefore, apparently, the others either did not survive or have not yet come to light. Now, we have a very definite critical problem in the fact that the Ante-Nicene Fathers used an entirely different background for quotational material from what we use. Why this was true, the demands required little thought. And it could be that this thought would be worthwhile. It could be meaningful. In order to understand this, then, let us go back and try to restore, at least in part, the situation as it existed in Christendom between the death of Peter and the Council of Nicaea. During this long period of time, we know as a definite fact that we must understand the condition of the world in those days. The condition of the world was so different from our own and so inconsistent with our general acceptance of things that unless we think, it is not likely that we shall hit upon the facts. In the first place, that part of the world, and that strata of society, in those days, we remember, the world consisted of about 99% of slaves and 1% of free men. The percentage was somewhat larger of free men under the Roman Empire because it bestowed citizenship for a number of reasons and freed men for a number of reasons. But for the most part, the world at that time was not lettered. And I think we are in possession of sufficient proof to justify this statement. But before we go on to the proof, let us unfold the statement a little bit. Just as we learned before that copies of the Torah, or the Old Jewish Law, were very few prior to the time of Jeremiah, and that therefore the descent of the religious traditions was vulnerable of destruction. A few manuscripts could be destroyed, and an irreparable loss could result. In the period under the rise of the early Christian community, we know from the area in which it flourished and the circumstances of the various writers, historians, and contemporaries, that the average gentleman, the average average man of wealth and influence was illiterate. We know, for example, that 1,000 years later in Europe, the King of France could not write his name. We know that as late as the 14th century, a noble family prided itself upon illiteracy and hired scribes to do their writing. A gentleman would not admit that he could read or write. It was simply a disgrace. Now, this was in Europe only 600 or 700 years ago. And it wasn't until Charlemagne, king of the Franks, set the style of literacy that there was any effort to create the great Carolingian system of monastery schools which later developed into the colleges of today. We know from the actual records of monasteries that in the 8th and 9th century, the majority of monks were illiterate. Therefore, the great need for the miracle play, which was a pictorial representation of religious life, and the illumination of manuscripts so that things could be taught by pictures. Many learned only orally from their instructors, and the condition of the written language in Europe was deplorable at that time. In fact, it was almost impossible. When Luther, much later, saw one copy of his own Bible, which he himself had translated and had printed, he could not himself read the printed version of his own Bible because of the practice of contractions and because of the utterly corrupt condition of the language. There is no language, for instance, more difficult today than what we call bastard Latin, with no profanity intended. This is a term properly given to a form of Latin, which is the ruination of the best Latin scholar of today. He simply cannot read it. So even much later, these things were true. And the condition of the world at the time under which we are examining things was such that the average person was illiterate. The exception would be some important government leader, a priest of one of the important religions, a few illustrious citizens, a senator, a general, or something of that nature, may be tradition. But the majority of the people did not read or write. Therefore, the development of a literature in what was then a minority sect, a sect which was not drawn, for the most part, from the higher levels of society, but drawn from the great proletariat of that day. The percentage of literate persons in such a group would be exceedingly small. We have records of some of the things that happened. We know, for instance, that Paul was literate. We know that he studied in the great college at Tarsus. We know that he not only spoke Jewish and studied philosophy in the Academy of Helios, but that he also, because he spoke Greek, was appointed as the apostle to Athens. We know that he was a literate man. We suspect strongly that Mark was a literate man. We are not certain of the others. We assume they may have been, we just do not know. But we also know that even if all of them had been literate, the majority of the congregation would not have been. This meant certainly several problems. One, which we know to be true, that the writings, the sacred writings of the early Christian communion, were regarded as relics and not as books. Their early travelers reporting their visits to the small churches, the major minor, were on some occasions taken into the church and shown a manuscript roll of some of Paul's letters or of one of the smaller gospel writings, probably the Apocrypha, magnificently stored away, rolled in silk and perhaps in a golden box. When asked what the manuscript contained, the priest replied he did not know because there was no one in the community who could read it. The manuscript was sacred as an object of respect and veneration, but not as an object to be read. There were at that time also travelers who wandered into these communities, and there are cases where the community summoned its entire congregation because a stranger had come into the area who could read and write. Therefore, they gathered the church, brought out the manuscript, and asked the stranger to read it to them, because they did not have any way of reading it for themselves. This may give us two rather important things to think about. The first is that these manuscripts certainly were not common. They are known not to have been common. Very few existed. The second thing that they tell us is that these manuscripts were not broadly circulated, even those that did exist. And there was not a great deal of reading of them. They were held as something wonderful and something fine, but not as something to be daily used. Again, we may understand why the beginning of the Christian Bible was in Athens, because it was after Paul had preached to the Athenians that for the first time the Christian doctrine reached a cultivated, literate people. And of course, as we know, all of the earliest manuscripts of the New Testament are in Greek. And therefore, that it was in Greek levels of scholarship, or among Grecian scholars, that all of the important early manuscripts were prepared. They were not prepared in the language of Syrian, although some even later Syriac manuscripts are known to exist. This lack of available manuscripts may well account for the fact that more have not been found. And if, as has been suggested, most of those who came to the Council of Nicaea brought these manuscripts with them, having been ordered to do so by Constantine and his secretary Eusebius. They brought their manuscripts to this great council, bringing the book or the scroll or the roll that had been so long in their altar, and treasured as a great and wonderful thing. After the canon was concluded, after the canonical books were decided upon, we know from the records of the council that the others were destroyed. And this probably explains why they could be destroyed, there not being many of them. And also why there were so few records of the biblical manuscripts prior to the Council of Nicaea. This, perhaps, is not exhaustive of the situation, but we do have some facts. We know, first of all, that the manuscripts did exist. We know, secondly, from contemporary authorities, that these manuscripts were not alike, but were much more numerous and different from any that we have today. We also know from contemporary authorities that very few copies of them were known. We know that the congregations could not read them. We know they were brought to the Council of Nicaea. We know that the canon was created, and we know that the others were burned. We know one other thing that gives considerable strength to our point, namely that out of the over 300 bishops and delegates who attended the Council of Nicaea, only Constantine and Eusebius could read and write. Particular point is made of that both in Roman history and in ecclesiastical history. Eusebius, who was the secretary and who kept the record, his own writings have survived, including the complete record of the Council of Nicaea. And Eusebius states without equivocation that he and the emperor were the only two persons present to read and write. So that we see that the older doctrine, concept, and belief that these manuscripts were held primarily as relics is well justified when as late as 325 AD, the heads of the Western and Eastern churches together were illiterate. You must remember that this would not have conflicted with ritual in that time. because the Mass and all the elaborate rituals we know did not exist at that time. The original meetings of the churches were much more like what we would call a Quaker meeting today. They all gathered in worship. An elder or deacon led in prayer. They ordained their own priest. There was no central hierarchy. And those who were moved by the Spirit spoke. And when they had finished, they ceased speaking and sat down. They broke bread together, celebrated a simple communion, and sang and danced together, according to St. Athanasius. In that time, we had a very simple religious life. Very sincere one, but one that was exceedingly simple. All these elements put together tell us what we know to be true, or rather they explain, to a degree at least, what we know to be true. Namely, that there was no record of an integrated religious literature prior to the Council of Nicaea. That about 325 A.D., the rudiments and basic elements of what we call the New Testament came into existence. Prior to that time, a number of manuscripts, now called logia, or mentioned only in other manuscripts, refer to a group of material known as the words of our Lord Jesus. This word has not survived to our knowledge, but it is used in capitalized and special form, indicating that it was the title of a work. Of the unknown writings, it is the most frequently referred to, and apparently there existed at some early time a more or less complete record of the words of Jesus. This is not, however, the same as we find in the Gospels, because when quoted, the quotations used are not even similar to those in the four Gospels. Therefore, it is a different work. It may have contained what is in the four Gospels, but it certainly contains certain other things also. Now, the history of the New Testament literature, as we know today, relates primarily to a series of sources which we can trace, with the exception of a few fragments on papyrus, so fragmentary that they are practically illegible, or perhaps contain only a verse or two, usually of the Pauline writing. There are no existing manuscripts known to exist of any New Testament work prior to the Nicene Council. After the Nicene Council, between the year 325 and 370, three great manuscripts came into existence. These are the manuscripts that are today the root and source of all our New Testament knowledge. One is the Sinaiticus, which was written in the middle of the 4th century, about 350. Another is the Vaticanus, written in the same century. And the third is the Alexandrinus, written in the next century, in the 5th century. Critical analysis of the Sinaiticus and the Vaticanus indicate that the same scribes worked on both of them. These manuscripts are therefore today regarded as the most valuable and most important of all the New Testament writings. For all practical purposes, they form the bedrock. There is no way of going back of them or going under them, other than what, as I've said, is the logia or the surviving apocrypha. With the exception of fragments, there is no other source or foundation that can go earlier that we know today. Others may exist, but they simply have never turned to light. And there is no authentic reference or record of any other great existence. These two contain both the Old and the New Testament. Neither is complete. But who visited this monastery observed one day a number of the monks taking out old gum to burn as waste paper and waste material. He went out and looked at some of the leaves, a few of which had already been burned. Recognizing the very early form of the Greek script, and realizing that undoubtedly these manuscripts were important, he begged the caretaker or the abbot of the monastery not to burn these manuscripts, but to permit him to take them. The abbot, realizing that something was unusual, did not wish to let go of the manuscripts, even though he would have previously been glad to burn them. However, Dr. Tikhonov made arrangement with the Tsar of Russia, within whose area this monastery was located, and in due course of time, the Patriarch of Constantinople made arrangements to have the manuscripts loaned to the Tsar of Russia. Dr. Tikhonov then made a facsimile reproduction under the patronage of Tsar Alexander, and the manuscript was preserved for the world. It remained in Russia until the time after World War I, with the rise of the communist regime, when it was sold to the British government for a very large sum of money and is now in the British Museum. This is probably the earliest manuscript of the New Testament. It dates approximately the same as the Vaticanus, but might be 5 or 10 years earlier. It is again a very critical point where manuscripts are that close together. But even then, there are peculiarities of style and idiom which can assist in the discovery of the exact date, or if not the exact date, the priority of one over the other. There is no question about the Alexandrinus. It is a little later, but it fortunately contains some parts that are missing in the other manuscripts. Altogether, these three ancient codices do not constitute the complete work. But of course it is possible to restore the Old Testament from the Septuagint version, which was done in the 3rd century B.C. So that little by little, what we call biblical criticism puts these pieces together until finally we come as near as we can into possession of the full story contained therein. Now the manuscript of the Codex Sinaiticus, which is the earliest, or at least if not the earliest, there's only a difference of a few years, gives us some information that is rather valuable for us to have. In the first place, in this manuscript, and in the Vaticanus, and in the Alexandrinus, no authorship is ascribed to any of the 4 Gospels. We do not have any examples of an authorship ascribed to the 4 Gospels until at least 500 years later. So that in those days, the 4 Gospels were anonymous. The next point that is of some interest to us is to consider that between these 2 great codices, the Sinaiticus and the Vaticanus, and the invention of printing and the publication of the Gutenberg Bible in 1445, we have a span of somewhat over 1,000 years. During that span of 1,000 years, we have factual knowledge of the existence of approximately 4,000 Bible manuscripts. Obviously, the further back you go, the fewer there are. But by the 6th or 7th centuries, there were a number. By the 10th century, there were hundreds and even becoming into thousands. And by the 15th century, 4,000 manuscripts are known. Now, these manuscripts, however, do not represent complete works. This group of 4,000 includes fragments. But each fragment is assumed to represent a manuscript. That is, if the fragment is obviously of a different period and a different type of workmanship or of a different religious background from the next one. In other words, where the writing is the same or where the structure and format is the same, they may be parts of one book. but we have reason to assume that we know of the existence of 4,000 different manuscripts. Of these, we do not know how many were complete Bibles, and how many may have been only single books of the Bible in their original written form. For example, we know that there is a whole group of manuscripts that never contained anything but the Pauline epistles. We know also that the 4 Gospels were issued separately, and therefore a complete manuscript might contain only one of the Gospels. But 4,000 such manuscripts do exist. Now, the next point that is of importance to us is the critical comparison of manuscripts. The critical comparison is for the purpose of discovering, if possible, the original text. Now, it is usual to assume that the Sinaiticus, or one of the earliest ones, is complete. This is not entirely true, however, because even the copyists of those first manuscripts appear to have had access to other materials. And we find in the descent of these manuscripts 2 lines of modification coming in. This is no longer theoretical, because biblical scholarship has 4,000 manuscripts and fragments to work with. It therefore has several hundred examples of one chapter of one gospel, separated perhaps by 1,000 years, or covering that length of time in the transcription of the verses and chapters, page by page, century by century. This work has been critically and accurately done. And we find 2 things. We find what are called accidental changes, or incidental variations. And we find what are termed intentional changes and intentional variations. Now, your intentional or your accidental changes and variations are due to several causes. We have to realize that the copyists in those days did not have comparative facility. A man copying a manuscript could not check 5 or 10 or 20 manuscripts to determine the accuracy of the copy he was working with. He had the only one in the area. Therefore, he was unable to determine whether his copy, the one he was working from, represented a very accurate copy or not a very accurate copy. He had no way of knowing the skill of the original copyist. And it was quite possible that a copyist working many long hours would do the same thing we do. Even in typing today, he could leave a line out. And if somebody left a line out in the 5th century, the copyist of the 6th century did the same thing. The one in the 7th century did the same thing. And so that change came on down through the centuries. Everyone carefully perpetuated it. Now we find, for instance, in the Codex Sinaiticus, that the scribe occasionally annotated the margins of his manuscript. Whoever did this work, there were several scribes work on it, was evidently a very advanced writer. What he knew of the content, we do not know. But that he was an accurate and very well-learned scribe, we do know. So we put a little marginal note. A man 100 years later copied that manuscript. And we can take the leaf of the copy and put it side by side with the original. And we see how carefully the second man took the little note that the first man had put on the margin and put it into the text. Perhaps when he put it into the text, he put in little marks around it, indicating that it was an insertion. The man who copied this one didn't notice the little mark. And in the next degree of copying, what had been a footnote became part of the text. Hundreds of those examples have been checked.
and known to be true. This explains why certain manuscripts change. And as you watch the descent of these manuscripts, they do change. Because the human being is not that mechanical in his procedure. As the written form changed, we had other problems because some scribes were better than others. There are books that have been evidently transcribed by a pious person who did not know how to read or write, but simply copied meticulously the shape on the glass. Therefore, when he found a difficulty or a contraction, he didn't know what to do. This type of thing can be traced and has been traced year by year, generation by generation in the descent of this manuscript. And that this is essentially a factual survey is now generally known to anyone who wishes to investigate the subject. Now, another interesting thing has happened which may have had some effect upon the scarcity of old Bible manuscripts, especially the New Testament. For a long time, Egypt had the papyrus monopoly. We thought about Luke getting hold of something and creating monopoly. The Egyptians did it. They got hold of this important writing material, which they were exporting to all parts of the then known world. And they ran the price up on it until it was practically prohibited. And they would not permit any other people to know the secret of its manufacture. In the later years of the Egyptian civilization, papyrus was sold at a square inch. And it is not at all unusual to find records of a man exchanging several fine-headed cattle for a little piece of papyrus large enough to write his will on. It became a monopoly. To break this monopoly, the use of parchment was introduced. And it was introduced at about the critical period of the beginning of the Christian era. It broke the papyrus monopoly and also made possible the folded book, which previously had not been possible because papyrus had to be rolled and could not be folded and split. So we have not only papyrus but parchment as extremely valuable media. An individual who had a half a dozen pieces of paper in those days was a rich man and highly regarded. This inevitably resulted in methods being devised to clean old parchments and vellums and papyri. Methods of fading out papers or documents that were no longer valuable were perfected, so that the same materials can be used or could be used again. Now, in the Vatican Library, we have several very embarrassing situations. We find that an original letter, not written by St. Paul, but a copy of one of them, perhaps a copy of the 2nd or 3rd century, has been very carefully faded out to permit the bill of sale for some slaves and some cows to be put in its place. For centuries, this meant the total and complete loss of the original. But now, by the means of infrared photography, the writing can be brought out again. And this written-over class of material is called a parenthel. And it is quite common, and there's still quite a few to be explored, because it is quite possible that works now in existence of an early date, associated with other subjects, would, under chemistry and under infrared photography, might reveal materials that we'd be glad to know about. But at least that may also be another explanation of where the material disappeared to. It was simply overwritten for other purposes because of the extreme scarcity and value of the original writing material. The material was more valuable than the content. Now, for this, for a point of interest in connection with this, to show you a little bit about some of these problems, I've taken a few verses from the 12th chapter of 2 Corinthians, and I have taken the Sinaiticus translation. In other words, for you to see how near and how far these verses are from the verses in the middle half of the 4th century. Unfortunately, no complete translation of the Sinaiticus is available. Someday that should be repaired, that difficulty, because it seems rather incredible that the oldest and most complete version of the New Testament should not be available in English. But you will see two things which are exactly what we want you to see. One is that the King James Version is remarkably like the Sinaiticus. But that in the course of what is here, about 150 words, there are about 60 word changes. Yet these word changes do not in every case vary the meaning. But now just for our own amazement, we'll compare these two versions. It is not expedient for me, doubtless to glory. I will come to visions and revelations of the Lord. I knew a man in Christ about 14 years ago, whether in the body I cannot tell, or whether out of the body I cannot tell. God knows. Such an one caught up to the third heaven. So this is the King James Version. Then this is what it says in the Sinaiticus. It is not expedient, indeed, to glory, but I will come to visions and revelations of the Lord. I knew a man in Christ who about 14 years ago, whether in the body I cannot tell, or whether out of the body I cannot tell, God knows, how that he was caught up into paradise and heard unspeakable words. Now the principal difference is that the original version says he was caught up into paradise. The King James Version says he was caught up to the third heaven. Now I took the trouble to check the Vaticanus and the Alexandrinus. Both of these contain the word paradise. Now there is a slight difference. The text is remarkably the same, but just where the third heaven comes from, it comes a little mysterious. Now we continue. Come up to the third heaven, and the third verse begins. I knew such a man, whether in the body or out of the body, I cannot tell, God knoweth. Now this is a repetition. Verse 3 is a repetition of part of verse 2. Verse 3 is not in the Sinaiticus. Verse 4. How that he was caught up into paradise and heard unmistakable words which it is not lawful for a man to utter. How, Sinaiticus, how that he was caught up into paradise and heard unspeakable words which it is not lawful for a man to utter. Now the principal difference in the point here is that in this case, the Bible, the King James Version introduces the word paradise as the thing he was caught up into, after having used the third heaven in the previous verse. In the Sinaiticus, both of these terms are represented with the same Greek word. In the King James Version, the word which in Greek, incidentally, is paradisio, or the use of it. It has become a third heaven in one place and a paradise in another. But there is no change in the Greek form. Then we go on in the King James. Of such an one will I glory, yet of myself I will not glory, but in mine infirmity. Sinaiticus. Of such a one I will glory, yet of myself I will not glory, but in mine infirmities. Here for 1,600 years there's been no change at all. Then the next, in the King James. For though I would desire to glory, I shall not be a fool, for I will say the truth. But now I forbear, lest any man should think of me above that which he seeth me to be, or what he heareth of me. Now, in this one there is quite a little difference. But now I forbear, even the abundance of the revelation. The word revelation does not occur in the King James Version. The word revelation is represented in the King James for the word truth. Lest any man should think of me above that which he seeth me to be, or that he heareth of me. Now, that is similar, but not by any means identical. Then the King James, unless I should be exalted above measure through the abundance of the revelation, there was given to me a thorn in the flesh, the messenger of Satan, to buffet me, lest I should be exalted above measure. That is all covered by this in the Sinaiticus. So lest I should be exalted above measure, there was given to me a thorn in the flesh, the messenger of Satan to buffet me. The lest I should be exalted above measure does not appear in the original. It appears twice in the same verse in the King James. It appears in neither place in the Sinaiticus. Now this is only a fragment, not selected for the purpose of pointing up controversy, but to show merely what happened in the course of about, we'll say, 1,200 years. In other words, the word changes. These changes also had another important implication, which we will now bring to your attention. The so-called Gospels, as we call them today, the books attributed to the four evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, from a critical standpoint of internal structure, tell us some things, but they also leave us a number of questions. And in the searching for the questions, we come to a conclusion that must be given some consideration. Remember, we have no history of these books whatsoever prior to their inclusion in the Sinaitic Codex after the Council of Nicaea. Therefore, we have 300 years of darkness, even at the very beginning of the Christian era. During these 300 years, we observe the Gospels according to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, as we call them today. And we observe that they have passed through certain differences. These differences point out one of two things. First, according to our popular canon or belief, these four works were all written by apostles or disciples of Jesus. Therefore, that these books should not agree on many very definite objective points leads to a certain amount of concern. Why do they not agree? We have from the study of the Bible manuscripts and from the existing fragments come gradually to the realization that probably originally the most complete and the most consistent in its internal structure of the four Gospels is the book of Mark. Now, Mark has passed through two definite periods. We know this from early quotations from Mark. There's what is called the early Mark and the late Mark. By early and late, I mean still a situation that was concluded and finished before the 5th century. But there were two versions of Mark. The shorter version probably belonged to one group and the longer version to another. Here is how the situation appeared. Apparently, there was originally one book of the four Gospels. We have been trying to put the books together for the best part of 20 centuries. And what actually seems to have occurred is that the book was taken apart in the first place. Now, this was not done by any malice or any evil intent, but it is very possible that we are dealing with the logia, or the mysterious book of the words of Jesus Christ. This book, which will only exist, mentioned, but mentioned many times by reputable writers, by saints and scholars and priests of the ante-Nicene period. But this book may have had a kind of general circulation, and it was sent at various times to certain centers of the Christian communion in Asia Minor and North Africa. Here it remains. Perhaps it was turned in at the time of the Nicene Council and destroyed. If so, a few persons remembered it, and remembered the circumstances and the general structure of it. And what appear to be the books of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and perhaps even John, are one book that had been placed in 4 widely different localities and left there for several hundred years. From what we can learn, Mark went to the book of Mark, not the Apostles. The book of Mark went to Rome. And the entire development of the Gospel according to Mark developed in Rome. The book of Matthew went to Antioch and belongs to one of the 7 churches which are in Asia. The book of John is the same book that went to Ephesus and remained there for several centuries. In the course of these several centuries, there were important schismatic divisions within the church. The Eastern Church broke away. It is possible that the manuscripts were lost or destroyed at the Nicene Council. And then these people went home, and in the course of time, from memory or from whatever sources were available, perhaps other manuscripts, they recopied these works, each time making certain variations due to and perfectly consistent with the troubles they were having on the political level, that is, religious politics. Well, these churches were divided from each other on certain doctrines. For example, the Church of Ephesus was the great mystic church of early Christendom. The reason being that Ephesus was a melting pot, the converging of all the caravan routes. And Ephesus has been said to be very much like the cauldron of the witch's brew of Macbeth. Everything got there, mingled and boiled and fumed together. Ephesus was a great center of transcendentalism. It was the center of the worship of the great goddess Diana, mother of mystery. It was the crossroads of the east and west. It was the caravan route which brought news from Egypt, Chaldea, Babylon, Persia, and other distant places. And out of the Church of Ephesus, there seems to have come what are called the Johnite writings, which are the Gospel according to St. John and the Apocalypse or the Revelation of St. John. Every element and ingredient of which was available at Ephesus. Now the Roman work, which was very essentially and definitely the work of the Gospel of Mark, remained stamped throughout its structure with the peculiar historical accuracy, the details, the familiarity with such knowledge as would be essential to a country that was colonizing and had colonized Syria. The Gospel of Mark carries the orderly development almost of Roman law. Matthew has the contact apparently with Antioch and its very reactionary attitude toward Rome and toward the rise of this new sect among the Syrian people. It is therefore
from the available manuscript descent, rather possible, we don't say anything dogmatic about it, but rather possible, that we are dealing, obviously, with the descent of one word through several centuries. We have many parallel examples to show that this situation could be the explanation. Because in the interval, for instance, between the 4th and the 7th century in Europe, the manuscripts of the New Testament found in the Sinaiticus and the Vaticanus went through equally important modifications. Therefore, the lapse of 3 or 4 centuries in an area with its own peculiar beliefs and ideas, and an area which was not able to have direct contact with Jewish history, would account for certain discrepancies in the historical record, which are irreconcilable, and also would explain a certain naivete in the handling of historical material, because the people involved now had no particular contact with the history. And as the historical significance faded out for them, we find great changes, crisscrossing, and inconsistencies, which would indicate that at no time prior to Nicaea and even after that did the fathers sit down together, read the 4 Gospels, and attempt to integrate them. They did not attempt any crisscrossing between them. Remember, in one, of course, Judas goes out and hangs himself, and another one he goes and buys a field of land and does other things. One he dies by accident, one he dies by suicide. The circumstances have become unimportant. The carrying on of the major trend of the thinking and its development along the religious and philosophical implications had gradually taken over importance. And the historical phases had lifted into secondary place. They could no longer be verified, for that matter, because the histories of these countries were not available in those areas. So we have what appears from careful study to be the breaking up of one story, or rather not its actual breaking up, but the same story being placed in 4 different localities and then allowed to develop there. So probably one of the most excellent examples of this is the carrying of this story to Ethiopia, because we know that the Gospels reached Ethiopia. And we know that by 3 or 4 centuries later, the Ethiopic Gospels and the commentaries on them had lost all semblance to what we know in the West. And yet, they are still one of the most valuable sources of information, because this particular group was completely free from the confusion and struggle that later distinguished the descent of the Western Church. We know also that even after the Council of Nicaea, the Eastern and Western Church broke over the validity of some of these books. We know, for example, that for a long time the Eastern Church accepted the Apocalypse and the Western Church rejected it. We know then that the situation was later reversed. And still later, Martin Luther left the Apocalypse entirely out of his great translation of the German Bible because he said it was not an inspired book. And he ordered that in all future editions of his Bible, if the Apocalypse was included, it should be accompanied by that note by him, to the effect that he did not regard it as an inspired work. No one paid any attention to him, however, including the Lutherans. But the book itself has been under controversy for centuries. And the reason for this controversy and the descent of it is well worth a certain amount of thought. Now, we have carefully avoided in this discussion any reference to the contents of the 4 Gospels. The general outline of the content is so well known to all of us It would be redundancy to tell the story again. But there are certain phases of the matter which may still be of considerable vitality. Because as early as the 3rd century, and the 4th certainly, when the great Council of Nicaea came into function, the problem of the gradual transformation of this structural book into the basis of a canonical literature was going on. The rise of the Bishop of Rome and the integration of the Western Church was accompanied by 2 great waves of scholarship. The first, as we have mentioned, was the ante-Nicene motion, and the second was the post-Nicene, which followed the Council of Nicaea. And the first and great outstanding name after the Council of Nicaea was St. Augustine of Hippo. And with Augustinianism, we find the beginning of the gradual integration of the doctrines of Christianity into a great legal code, a great moral, ethical structure. Prior to that time, it had been composed of little groups functioning alone in the wilderness, in their isolated ecclesia or chapels and churches. But after this period, we find a powerful integration. And this powerful integration immediately resulted in what might be termed the great cycle of interpretation. Now, interpretation had its effect upon the descent of the biblical text, because interpretation became a matter strongly emphasizing the choice of words. Now, the original idea was not to choose words. Actually, the choice of the word was dependent upon the meaning of the term. But in the most ancient languages, including Greek and Hebrew, words have more than one meaning. And the problem of interpretation can affect translation, and can affect it strongly. For instance, 5 Greek scholars belonging to 5 different Christian sects, confronted with a certain statement in the Bible, can honestly and sincerely come up with 5 different translations, because the words themselves permit it. And the interpretation is perfectly legitimate, but it is difficult to determine sometimes which of these reasonable translations is the correct one. This led to certain revisions in translation. Now we know that the New Testament began perhaps in Syriac, or at least parts of it, but we haven't had it. Nor do we actually know with certainty very much except fragments, some few ancient fragment relics, but we don't have anything of a consecutive nature. So that actually our New Testament begins in Greek. We do not know at this time how to evaluate that Greek. We do not know how close it was to the unknown original, because that unknown original has not survived. Therefore, we must accept the Greek. We can do nothing else. We know no other approach to it. We can go no further, unless the gods are gracious enough to bestow further manuscript discovery. We cannot edit the Greek beyond this point. We do know, however, that in the 2nd century, the Greek began to move into the Latin, and that in the first 150 years, approximately, it was all Greek. There was no other available form. Then, in the middle of the 2nd century, or near the end of it, Latin began to be important. The Greek language began to fail as a common language of civilized people, and the Latin forms took its place. Now here we had a great motion of translation. A translation motion that is some way reflected into the Greek manuscripts that we have, because the ones we have are later than this. We do not know whether the Sinaiticus and the Vaticanus are directly from the Greek, or whether they are retranslations from the Latin back into the Greek. Because between the actual period of the Gospel and the first manuscript that we have, there was this complete turnover in language. But this turnover, or this turnabout from one language to another, should have affected the church in Rome, is certain. Because in Rome, up to about the middle of the 2nd century, Greek was still the language of scholarship. After that, Latin took over. There must have been a transition in the New Testament writings from Greek to Latin. No Latin versions of this period have survived. Therefore, we can wonder whether the Greek versions of the 4th century are from the Syriac, from the Amharic, from the Latin, or from the Greek itself. This we do not know, and there is no indication whatever that will tell us. We do know, however, that from the 4th century Greek translation, Latin versions were almost immediately made, and gradually versions into practically every other language of Europe. These versions are not identical. And, of course, the English versions are comparatively late. Therefore, it is not certain at just what time or under what conditions the English versions did come into existence. We know that the English versions that we have did not come directly from the Sinaiticus or the Vaticanus. They came from preceding translations, such as perhaps the Vulgate or other versions, which had passed through from 3 to 5 translations before they reached English. Anyone who has tried to read a simple poem first translated from the German into English 10 years ago will realize the difficulties of the situation. These difficulties are real, and the point of criticism is not to lead or to cause difficulties to become frustrations. That's not the purpose of it. The purpose of criticism is to try to open the way back to the original, as far as it can possibly be done, realizing from an absolutely factual survey of the mistakes in spelling, the mistakes in grammar, the mistakes in idiom that have crept in through various countries over 1,000 or more years, that the mistakes are not sacred. They are what they appear to be. And that therefore the problem is to try to correct them and to get a version that is nearer to the original as far as we are able to reach back toward the original, always hoping that with the passing of time we will be able to get nearer. Now all of this presupposes one thing, that is the importance of the original. If this is doubted or questioned, then the entire criticism falls to pieces. But if it is important to know, so far as it is humanly possible to know, the actual words of Jesus and his disciples, then the criticism is valid. Because it is only through this research that we can find out these very important things. And that is why biblical scholars have worked upon it so long. It is not to satisfy their own skepticism primarily. It is simply to try and find out, if they can, what was originally meant. Now, this also, of course, supposes that what was originally meant is the most important thing we can gain from the study of this particular subject. Now, early in the 4th and 5th centuries, during the period of St. Augustine, we find the mingling of the rising school of Christian literature with that of non-Christian sects in these areas. The most important that Augustine mentions, of course, is the Manichaean sect. It was a Persian sect in origin, and to which he himself belonged for a long time. many years. And this sect was considered heretical by the Christians, and Augustine spent many years repenting this early membership in a non-Christian organization, along with many other things that he repented, including the stealing of apples. But the problem lay in the fact that there was a whole group of Christian material, or neo-Christian material, such as that recently discovered in the Gnostic excavations in Egypt. And we find surrounding the core of biblical literature in the New Testament a tremendous aura of material about which we know very little as far as its relation to the originals are concerned. There is concern. We know, for example, the rise of the Islamic material found in the Quran. Now, the Quran was done in the 6th century. The Quran was therefore done within about 200 years, or 250 years of the Codex Sinaiticus. It is an old work containing considerable material relating to the life of Jesus. Much of this material is not to be found in the Gospels. Now we can say to ourselves, perhaps Muhammad invented it. That seems a little dubious. The reason why it seems dubious is because what relations and ties that we have with material that is known would indicate a very careful and methodical organization. It is, from the way he handled it, it is much more reasonable to assume that he took it from some source available to him. Now we know that while he was employed as the caravan master for the rich widow of Khadijah, that he did go along the caravan route and met the Nestorian heretics. These Nestorian Christians penetrated as far as China, and in the early centuries of the Christian era had a tremendous sphere of influence all over the Near East. They had their own books, not canonical, not accepted, but still books which perhaps they had saved from the burning of Nicaea and had taken with them into the desert. And these books did contain accounts of the life of Jesus, the miracles of Jesus, and the logia, or statements, sections of material in his own words which are not in the Gospels. It is very probable that Muhammad secured his material from the Nestorians because he is known to have studied with them. And the type of material which he used is a type which gave to the Nestorians their reputation for heresy. Now, at the same time, we find the rising Gnostic sect in Egypt. And the recent discoveries push back the books of the sages and the book of the Pistis Sophia considerably earlier than had previously been supposed. And we have books devoted almost exclusively to the words of Jesus, not one line of which is in the canon, and which certainly date back to the 5th or 6th century. Here we have in the Pistis Sophia the discourses of Jesus to Mary of Magdala. Very elaborate and very important, dealing with phases of his doctrine not covered by any of the existing works that are in the canon. So these manuscripts were undoubtedly treasured by borderline groups, and the location of the manuscripts may associate them with what are called the Therapeutae. And the Therapeutae were a Jewish sect that flourished in Upper Egypt and had their temples there, about Tyre. This Jewish sect apparently included a comparison of Christian and Jewish mysticism and was interested in the Gnosis. And in the Gnostic writings relating to Jesus, we find a great many interesting things. One of the logia, for example, is that which refers to Jesus and the dead dog, pointing the dog to his disciples, who have made unpleasant remarks about it and saying, pearls are not whiter than its teeth. There are many, many such things. And these are all found in these related books. So we have a wide aura of religious books relating to Christianity, extending from the 4th to the 9th or 10th centuries and out into most distant and unusual areas. No effort has in general been made to gather these together and examine their common content. There has been as yet no breaking down of the barriers between the canonical and the uncanonical books, as they are called. But Bible criticism moves past this barrier immediately and begins to examine any and all related material, anything that has the stamp of a genuine contemporary period or the internal evidence of a high degree of personal illumination or sanctity, so that the content spreads out over a much wider field than it did a few years ago. Now, the development of the interpretive mind in the church and in the various groups has led gradually to another important situation, and that is the Ante-Nicene Fathers were what were called the apologists of the church. At that time, the church was not strong. It was fighting for its survival. And in order to achieve whatever security it could, it was forced to rationalize its way along through the difficult and involved political and religious system of the time. A very good example of the Ante-Nicene Father is Clement of Alexandria. And Clement of Alexandria spent a large part of his work against heresy, as it is called, explaining and crisscrossing between the existing non-Christian systems and the early Christian faith. He says in one place, if we teach the death and resurrection of our Savior, he's addressing the Egyptians or the Romans, if we teach the death and resurrection of our Savior, we teach no more than you have taught, who have taught the death and resurrection of your Savior. This was the spirit of the Ante-Nicene apology. They were bridging across. They were trying to prevent an open break. And more than that, they were working from the fact that in those days, practically every Christian in the congregation had been born a pagan. There were very few second-generation Christians at that time. Most of them were converts. Most of them had come from other beliefs. And the Ante-Nicene Fathers were bridging as much as they could between the different systems so as to make the motion across as simple and as easy a transition in religion as possible. After the conversion of Constantine and the creation of the Holy Roman Empire, the post-Nicene Fathers took a much more positive attitude and split completely with all non-Christian groups. But because the Ante-Nicene period terminated at the Council of Nicaea, and because all of the books that we have date from immediately after that period, and within 50 years, there are groups of Bible scholars who believe firmly that among the various religious writings are a number, perhaps either canonical or uncanonical, in which the analogies between systems have been stressed, and that therefore in certain translations and versions that there have been certain parallels drawn for some reason. And this gives an entirely different field of research and one which can and does become almost immediately highly controversial. And because of that factor, we're not going to attempt to go into it more than to point out what we mean. And each student is then entitled to develop his own concept of how this controversy should be treated. The controversy springs from, perhaps, the opening section of John. In the beginning was the Word, or in the beginning was the Logos. Now, in the opening chapter of John, we find something that is quite difficult. There is a legend, and we say this because a legend must definitely be subtracted or divided from any factual statement, and the student is entitled to know the status of each thing. There is a legend, no more. It's one on which there has been considerable research, that the opening chapters of John were written much earlier than the rest of the gospel material, and perhaps before the beginning of the Christian era. The reason for that is that certain sections of it are to be found in material dating in the 3rd century B.C. But again, it is legendary, so we do not express it as more than that fact. A work attributed to a pre-Christian writer, Cerinthius, is supposed to have been incorporated into the opening chapter of John. Because it is entirely unique among the gospel narratives and in a completely different temper from the rest, that it may have had a separate or different origin is possible. We know, for instance, that at least three writers worked on Matthew, and not less than 3 on Mark, and that these 3 writers lived at least over a period of 400 years. They were not all at the same time. But the contribution that each made is a matter for technical research. It can be distinguished, however. This matter of interpretation became very, very important. And there is a question that arises that has to be solved in some way. How it is solved is very largely a matter of the personal beliefs and the personal convictions of the individual. One group will solve it very simply by taking the attitude that with God all things are possible. Therefore, that there is no problem. Others will take it more on the grounds that there is a problem due to obvious dependencies upon obviously physical things. This is a matter, again, of choice. But we know, for example, that for some reason, and for purposes that obviously seem to be significant, the story contained within the 4 Gospels, when reduced to its essential elements, and when brought down to a pattern, is a story which contains, to say the least, highly symbolic elements. By that we mean that the story of the life of Jesus parallels with extraordinary closeness many other accounts arising in different areas at different times. Interpreters approaching the subject have several solutions to offer. One is that by the very circumstances of the revelation itself, it was spiritually predestined and foreordained that this story should parallel certain other precedents. Another attitude is that in a place like Ephesus, where all these stories were available, it might well be that certain patterns were used by persons enlightened, illumined, initiated, ordained, who thereby made certain modifications upon an historical account in order that it might be identical with a larger pattern of belief. As an example, and we will just leave it exactly as it is, as an example, we will take the possible indebtedness of the story to something derived from Egypt. In Egypt, although we do not hear much about it in these days, in the early period, at the time even before, in the period from about 1500 BC to about 400 or 500 BC, there was a deity comparatively prominent whose name was Neisi. This deity was born of an immaculate conception. His coming was predestined and foreordained by a great light in the heavens. He was forced to leave the country because of the fact that his life was threatened by a jealous relation who was a great prince of the land. He traveled into a distant country, came back to his own country when he was a small boy, appeared in the temple and confounded the elders. His first miracle in Egypt, from the manuscript dated 1000 BC, his first miracle was the changing of water into wine. He healed, he taught, he had disciples, he went through various experiences, he celebrated the Eucharist, he had his Sermon on the Mount, he was executed, buried, raised from the dead, and sat in heaven beside his Father. This record was complete at least 1,000 years BC. Now this has caused the symbolic in the critical problem of religion a certain amount of rather reasonable concern. The Dionysiac cycle has also caused them some consideration. The tremendous section from the Apocalypse, which is almost verbatim from the Book of the Dead, has caused them some consideration. The Last Judgment has caused them a little thought, and many, many other sections, because of the almost identical parallel. And when the Pope said in the 5th century, the 25th day of December is not so sacred for the birth of Jesus Christ as for the birthday of the celestial Son, this caused consideration. And it has been one school of interpretation from the beginning that has come to the conclusion that at some time historical events were moved sufficiently around a situation itself with very dim historical boundaries to make it confirm or make it agree with the doctrine of the Logos, a doctrine which we find universal at that time. The second group says no, that all other and preceding stories were but foreshadowings and anticipations of this event, that they were symbolical and that this event was real. Now that is one school of thought. These different schools then pass into what might be termed critical Bible study. And today, in the majority of theological seminaries where critical Bible study is carried on, the would-be clergyman is being taught the principles of from 10 to 15 different religions, because it is beginning to be obvious that they are more or less essential to the critical study of Christianity itself. And that this concept of a complete isolation of the faith cannot be sustained by serious scholarship. If, therefore, through criticism of text and study, we at least come to the realization of a certain broadness, a certain fullness of religious background, by which peoples of various faiths can intelligently, consistently, and righteously study the religions of other peoples, we will be much nearer to the solution of our basic theological difficulties. And one of the great causes for the corruption of texts during these dark ages was the fact that nobody knew enough about anything to correct or clarify the situation. All of these points become part of a legitimate study of biblical symbolism and philosophy. Now, I'd like to pause for a few moments to say something on the subject of one Bible that is of great interest to us, and that is the Authorized Version of the great King James of 1611. This Bible is the result of a very serious difficulty that arose in England, in which two important Christian denominations locked horns over the Bible. It occurred about 1604, soon after James had ascended the throne. And in order to meet or arbitrate the difficulties of these two groups, both of whom petitioned him, King James made the statement that he had always personally felt the insufficiency of the then available translations of the Bible. He said he did not consider the form, the wording, the selection of terms, the dignity of the translation as commensurate with the importance of the text. Therefore, he appointed a group of scholars to create the revision which we know as the King James Version. Now, actually, it is a mistake to assume that the King James Version is a new edition of the Bible. It is not. The King James Bible is a revision of the Bishop's Bible, the one which immediately preceded it. And in probably half of the text, there is not a word changed between the Bishop's Bible of 1580 and the King James of 1611. There have been a few modifications and changes. But King James himself put such a limitation on the procedure that there was very little that could be done. He forbade any variation from the Bishop's Bible unless it was absolutely necessary. Well, in matters of that nature, what is absolutely necessary? He forbade any change in the spellings of proper names. He forbade any eliminations of words. No word could be left out within the other. And he also forbade any new word to be added. And by the time he got through with this, practically permitted only a little juggling this way and that. There was a little polishing, and one or two audacious scholars did change the word. But it is almost a completely identical revision only, editing revision of the Bishop's Bible, which in turn was based upon the famous Preacher's Bible, of which incidentally trailed on into the Bishop's Bible and is notable for the famous verse in Genesis in which instead of Adam and Eve making girdles of fig leaves, in that version they made breeches of fig leaves. And this is the origin of the Preacher's Bible. In about 1870, the first great effort was made to revise the Bible. Perhaps it was an audacious move, because to the average person, the Bible is or was written in English by God, just the way He had it. As my old dad used to say, without a jot or tittle being out of place. One small boy in Sunday school said that the Bible was written by St. James of England in 1611. One of the ways people feel about it. But anyway, an effort was made to completely bring it back to the oldest and best manuscripts with the most direct and simple translations in the idiom of the time. That is, in the idiom of the period in which the book was first known to have existed. In doing so, the Old Testament was considerably changed. Job and several other works were put back into verse, which is the way they were originally written. Many changes were made. The chapter divisions were changed, because in all the early versions, the chapter divisions are different from what we have now. All important interpolations after the 5th or 6th century were noted and bracketed so that the individual could tell what had been added after the basic manuscript. And many efforts were made to bring it into a complete integration. One effort also included the effort to put together again the four Gospels and make the one story as nearly as it could possibly be restored according to the original. Of course, the move received no support whatever, because the situation has become so associated with the public mind that this kind of procedure is comparatively worthless from the public standpoint. They're not interested. The wording, the old form, has become so near and dear to their hearts that they are not interested in any further variations on it. Therefore, all such work belongs definitely on the level of biblical criticism. It belongs among those who are studying these things in the original languages or are re-editing and revising them for serious research. But that there is a tremendous field of research here, and that it is important to a world in which there are 600 million Christians who are concerned about their own book and who want to understand more, not only of its contents, but how it came into being. Because most people are interested. We are interested in the families of our friends. We're interested in their backgrounds. We're interested in the physical association, I guess, of persons and things in which we have a deep attachment. And it is inevitable that a Christian world should want to understand its book, to want to know its content and its source, and if possible, restore any errors, mistakes, or deletions that may have come in. And that is what this practice of criticism is for, and it also hopes to leave a certain general overtone of a larger and more generous and understanding approach to the subject, and perhaps, as biblical criticism today points, less emphasis upon detail and more upon the large ethical and spiritual motions of the content. Because for centuries, detail has divided people. And biblical criticism today is away from detail by eliminating as secondary those things which are not held in common and emphasizing those things which are held in common. And out of this criticism comes greater tendency to think in the terms of the Sermon on the Mount than to think in the terms of the genealogies. Both may have their place, but for the average person, it is the great ethical and moral structure, the spiritual dynamic, that is of greater importance than the historical background. The historical background may help us to clear certain ambiguous and confusing character. And we know we have 500 sects of Christendom today, and probably 400 of those sects only exist because of confusing translations of the Scriptures, in which the individual cannot be sure of the original meaning. And therefore, he has gradually, over a period of time, built up a tremendous divisional emphasis. Because where we know the facts, there is very little difference of opinion. But where the facts are not known, opinion dominates. So the correction of certain faults might have a tremendous power in bringing Christendom back together again, as today the biblical student is trying to put together this book to reveal as clearly and simply and directly as he can the tremendous dynamic of the subject. Well, I think that's enough for a warning.